Hi, my name is Karen Holmes. I'm the founder and director of the World Peace Organization for the One World Government. Today I wanted to talk about Russia and Ukraine, and I wanted to talk about the idea of how to defend yourself in a situation like this. The people who are tracking this in the government are starting to call it a genocide. And a genocide is a very, very difficult thing to stop. Once it gets started, it's very difficult to stop because it is the knee-jerk reaction that stops a war makes a genocide worse. People have been, let's say, making fun of Vladimir Putin, and he's getting angry, and it's like our comedians have been doing that, or the attack was supposed to work. Now, it's very hard to know which game he's playing. The idea of weaving an illusion, there are two possible power games that he's playing. One of them is genocide, and the other one is slavery and the human rights violations. They basically do the same thing in terms of the killing and that, but the game is different. So we have to look at which of the games he's playing related to revenge, because it's what he wants. This is my drawing on the back of this, but it gives a really good idea about the games of revenge. He's playing a game of revenge, and when you stop and think of it, if revenge brings together, which I've talked about lots of times in previous videos, if revenge brings together people who play 5 different power games. So if you are looking at this, you really need to know, to stop it, you really need to know who are all involved with this. And this game I don't particularly want to go into that now, but the person who plays the game of war sets the stage for the genocide, which sets the stage for the massacres based on greed, which sets the stage for slavery, and that leads to terrorism, and then it goes back to this point, and then the people who brought them in will undermine the people will undermine. It'll unravel based on unraveling the person, undermining the person who brought them in. So this is one of the things that we need to look at, and I'm not sure what his power game is. Is he playing the game of lust or envy? These are both based on weaving an illusion. So we have to look at, to understand this completely, we have to look at the games he's playing. Lust is the game. It sounds like the game of a sexual thing, but that isn't necessarily the case. That game comes from people who fear intimacy, and they hold people to them and they push them away. Hold people and push them away. An example of this is Donald Trump, and he's been accused of sexual assault, that kind of thing. He holds people to himself. He's very close to his family, but then he fires people. He's known for firing people. That is an example of someone who plays this game of lust. Okay? When that happens, the people who want this, who play this game, fear intimacy, and then they want a combination. They get revenge with the idea of getting a combination between a voice and abundance. So Donald Trump, for example, if you're looking at him and comparing him to this, he tweets all the time. He wants his social media. He's even tweeting during like the insurrection and things like that. And it's thousands and thousands. He wants his voice and he wants abundance. So you see how you can tell what game people are playing by what they are. I don't know Putin well enough to be able to say if it's envy or if it's a genocide. What he does is he puts somebody on a pedestal, and when he did that, his hero on the pedestal was somebody who he compared himself to, and he could never match up with that. He could never compete with that. He was always coming from a lack of capacity. So now this is fear of intimacy, and this is lack of capacity. When you lack capacity, then becomes, and you put somebody on a pedestal, then it becomes a sense of judgment where you're looking at and comparing everybody to that man, and it's always an issue of black and white. Those are the people who perpetrated genocide, and they do that with lack of capacity. Comes from the revenge. That's what this is. Look, it's a pentagon. The basis for our military, our headquarters of the U.S. military is the Pentagon, and that's because of this. So what they do is they get revenge for a combination of pride, which is respect, and abundance. So when you look at the Iraq War, for example, and George Bush, that devolved as a genocide. He wanted George Bush. My cat is trying to communicate with me here. Okay, so you see, that is what leads to a genocide right here. It's a sense of judgment. It's a saying, you are evil, and nobody has a right to really say that somebody else is evil. So we're looking at this, but what we can do is, even if we don't know Putin well enough, people who studied him for a long time would know enough about him to be able to talk about the game he's playing. But what we can do is we can take this idea, and we can look at it and just say all we have to do is look at these 7 power games. The people who have been dragged into a genocide lack their liberty, and the people who have been dragged into slavery lack compassion, basically. That is a matter of compassion, but also freedom. And so when people are the covert and overt actions, this is freedom. So we're looking at all these 7 principles, and those counter the games that are being played, all the games related to this revenge. If we try to defend ourselves, so the idea is how to defend yourself from this act of revenge. So let's say that they created this pentacle of power, and they're grabbing for power by getting revenge. 5 people or groups of people have come together. They're getting power. You could say that Xi Jinping, for example, is playing the game of greed, with the idea that he's got his Silk Road idea, and he's trying to build this structure. I don't know if he's coming from a lack of abundance or whatever. And part of that has to do with our knowing that helps us with the idea of the faith of the pure ray, because if he is coming from a Confucianist idea, religion, and big China is Confucianist, and that is capacity. But on the other side of the circle is Buddhism and the principles of abundance. So isn't it odd that they're depending on building something coming from their capacity, but the principles of abundance on the opposite side of the circle? The faith of the pure gives you an idea about the mindsets, the people who have come from different religions. So now, what I wanted to talk about today is how to defend yourself by standing on these principles. Now, our organization introduced into our legal system this letter to the Supreme Court, which introduced universal law into our legal system. And universal law stands on these 7 principles. Basically, it creates a sense of balance again. I introduced this recently about your power base, that if you stand on one principle, eventually you'll be toppled. If you stand on 2, it gets harder for you to be toppled. It's stronger defense. But if you stand on 7 principles, then basically, you're unbeatable. That's what it says right there. 7 principles. So if our country is concerned about Russian acts of aggression, instead of attempting to fight Putin, like sending all this military. Now, I'm not going to tell them what to do, but I'm telling them that they really need to stand on these principles to defend ourselves, because we're unbeatable. And Ukraine, too, could be considered unbeatable by standing on these principles because of this power base, your power base. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea here. I've talked about that free power source invention and the light source invention and the intuitive computer and inventions. And does that look familiar? Okay, I talked about how you roll along like this. Okay, now I'm going to share with you something new today, and it is something that I've been working on my books, and when I saw that picture again, it reminded me of a book that I had channeled with called The Road to Greatness, On the Road to Greatness. And do you recognize that circle and how rolling it along? That is, you could say, a wheel from a carriage, and basically it's got 7 spokes, 7 principles, and it's basically the same thing that's on here. So if you're unbeatable, what you want to do is to be able to roll like that, and here, and here, your power base, and here. They'll fit into this one idea. So now, let's, instead of looking at Putin, instead of looking at George Bush and what happened in the Iraq War that started as a genocide, not a war, and that's why it was so hard to stop. What I'm going to tell you is this. I channeled this book with Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc is one of my guides, and basically what she did is she came through and she told me, this book is not available yet. I have to bring in the professional publishing team for this to be available to the general public. But so what did Joan of Arc do that allowed her to roll on and to continue on and on the road to greatness? And in this book she explains, I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. I still have to do a couple more. She's talking about liberty. Liberty is the principle, going back to this, liberty is the principle that counters a genocide. Right here. Oops. Right here. Genocide, liberty. Okay, so she's talking about how to counter a genocide with liberty. Now think about what happened back during the 100 Years' War. Americans are not really aware of the 100 Years' War in France, and what happened there was a hostile takeover. Henry V moved England. There was a war between one of the kings between Henry V of England and one of the kings of France, and it was the War of Agincourt. What happened then is Henry won the war, and he married the daughter of the king. And by doing that, he moved into that area of France and took it over. So for 100 years, they were trying to kind of get everybody out of there. They were the French out, and Joan was responsible. She was a psychic. She heard voices, and the voices told her to go and declare the Dauphin the rightful king of France. Well, she raised an army. She raised an army before she left her town. She was just like 17, 18 years old at the time. She had to encounter a woman who was basically a sociopath, scaring everybody. And the reason for that was that the Burgundians had sent out people who were like slaves, and those people were brutal. You could say that to the people, and that way they kept them under control. Well, Joan, after all these years, heard the voices, and she had to face the woman. This is a historical fact. She had to face the woman, and then she took off, and she met two dukes, and those dukes were the ones who helped her raise the army. They gave her what she needed, and they helped her start out, and then she made it to France, and then that was when she was captured by the Catholic Church. And members of the Catholic Church, they basically tried her for heresy, because hey, in those days they didn't have any prophets anymore. So anyway, that was his historical event. They were using everything they could to protect what they had stolen. Okay, so now what we have is, what did Joan basically do in this book? She talks about liberty. She talks about liberty and abundance, and the liberty and all these other ideas. She believes that liberty is the most important idea. So if we're looking at these, the principle, if we're looking at these 7 principles that counter the 7 deadly sins, they create a sense of balance again in the world because of the darkness. Then, once that happens, so now you could say that we are in another situation here where, let's say, China and Russia believe, because of the Iraq War, we collapsed our power base. We weren't standing on any of those principles. We collapsed our power base. The games continue on until an innocent person is sacrificed or crucified, like Jesus was. This is just a couple of days after Easter and the resurrection. Jesus went in, was crucified, and then when he rose again, he basically demonstrated the fact, his power over death. So I'm going to just say that universal law, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is the answer to this. And I know that you're probably questioning that, but we have, in the United States, we have a problem, and that is Russia has infiltrated into the United States, and basically we have to consider the fact that we could be toppled also, because we don't have our power base anymore. For us on a personal level to do that, if the light source invention, the first question is, are you willing to stand on universal law? If you say, no, I don't, I have the most powerful army in the world, basically you don't have the most powerful army in the world, because you just collapsed your power base. You have no power. you are not willing to stand. This is the free power source invention, remember? And you have no power. God does not live on your 12th story. This is all your chakras on a personal basis. You're not storing any energy, because what there's let's say there's a loop that goes here and it goes down in to support that. So let's say God, it lives on all these floors, has connections to all these floors, and stores the energy right here in the lower base of it. If you want to build a personal power, the first step is you have to address universal law, and then you have to start building a structure in your own, if your country, if you're the leader, you have to build a power structure in here, in your own country. If you're an individual, you have to rebuild your power base on principles rather than power games. Otherwise, you just keep toppling your power base. Okay, so then these are the two most important floors if you are a 12-story building, and these are all your 12 chakras, the 7 inside your body and the 5 kingdoms outside the body. You need to start working both on universal law, standing on the principles of universal law, or you break your power base, and then to build it back, you have to do this, and then you have to start create win-win agreements within your own family. One of the things that is happening now, like in Ukraine, is Putin so many people families have been torn apart. You have the mothers and the children who are leaving. You have the husbands who are staying behind to fight, to defend the country. If the United States, and ifs and supposed really are not very good, because our PowerPoint is right now. It's not what I should have done a long time ago, because that regrets really don't work very well. It's right now it's a PowerPoint. What to defend the United States, to defend Ukraine, to defend the NATO countries, and the countries like Estonia and Finland, and those are the countries that are, let's say, next in line. But the ultimate conclusion is that the United States has been compromised also with what happened with let's say Donald Trump, and what happened with the not giving him, and the impeachment trial and the acquittal. So what we have is on an individual basis, this works. Now, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. She wasn't able to stand up, but she stood up and she did what she was supposed to do, but then the Catholic Church stepped in. But the Catholic Church at that point in time was also created by a bunch of people. They were not standing on very high principles, because let's say the king would decide who the Pope was instead of coming up with an idea. So right now what we have is a very different set of circumstances now. Will the church stand on these principles too of God's law? So where do we stand in history? Are we taking the 100 Years' War and all the hostile takeovers? Are we unraveling this? Where does Joan fit into this? Are we replaying history now and taking it to the next level? Do we have to have hostile takeovers just the plan for the international government stands on all of these ideas? Protects people's liberty, protects people's rights. Liberty is your unalienable rights to live your life without interference, to fulfill your purpose in life. to be treated fairly and equally, and to have a voice in your government, among others, according to our founders. Are we going to stand on the principles that our founders said were unalienable rights? Okay, and to get our unalienable rights back that we lost when we invaded Iraq, which is what we did with under George Bush. We invaded Iraq. It was no weapons, mass destruction. We haven't dealt with that yet. So what I recommend as part of this idea to defend the United States, we need to do the exit strategy for Iraq, and we have to deal with our country, our nation as a country, as a family, like, instead of pushing people away and like putting border walls up and making sure that people can't go anywhere or whatever. We have to stand on these principles, and then we have to stand on the liberty and support the plan for the international government. That is the solution. And then the first one is the exit strategy for Iraq, and say, been there, done that. We took over Iraq. We started a war that's basically still going on, because even if we pulled out, it's still not back, because we started a genocide, and the ripples keep going out and still affecting people. Now we want is to stop this, set up a protocol for ending genocides, and take disputes off the battlefield and put them into the courts where they belong. And then the rest of us can just go on and live our lives without interference. Why should Russia or anybody else believe that they can go in and take over a country? But the United States did that too. So as we are pointing fingers, we also have three fingers pointing back at us. We have to address the illegality of the Iraq War. We have to address all these government proposals, and then that were based on the idea of genocide, or on judgment. Okay, and our failed policies, our failed foreign policies, because Joe Biden is using the same government policies that we've had in the past, and this time it's not going to work. So I ask that you like, share, and subscribe, but most of all share, because this information is important. Okay, thank you.